We don't have time for nobodies." The words cut through the room like a knife through silk, leaving absolute silence in their wake. In his tailored Brioni suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, venture capitalist Richard Harmon didn't even bother looking at the young engineer as he dismissed him. Hundreds of wealthy investors gathered in the glass-walled penthouse overlooking San Francisco watched the scene unfold. Some smirked, others looked away uncomfortably. Nobody intervened. But in the shadowed corner of the room, a figure in a simple black t-shirt straightened, his attention suddenly and completely focused. The Platinum Investment Summit was the most exclusive gathering in tech finance. Invitation only, with a minimum investment threshold of $50 million. Security was tight. Champagne flowed freely, and deals worth billions were made with handshakes before contracts were ever drafted. Alex Chen had somehow managed to get in with his prototype, having convinced a sympathetic staff member that his clean energy innovation could change the world. For 3 years, he'd worked out of his garage, maxed out credit cards, and alienated friends and family to bring his vision to life. And in 10 seconds, Harmon had crushed it all. Alex's hands trembled as he tried to gather his presentation materials, his face burning with humiliation. The whispers had already started, phones recording the moment for later amusement. "Maybe stick to coding for someone else," Harmon added loudly, provoking scattered laughter. Real innovation requires more than just technical skills. It requires connections. He emphasized the last word while gesturing around the room. No one noticed how the man in the black t-shirt had begun moving through the crowd, purposefully making his way closer to the front. No one recognized Elon Musk until he was already there. The silence that had fallen over the Platinum Investment Summit was thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard Harmon stood with the confidence of a man who had never been challenged, who had built his empire by saying yes or no to others' dreams. His dismissal of Alex Chen wasn't personal. It was simply how the world worked. The young engineer didn't belong here among San Francisco's elite tech investors, among people who moved markets with tweets, and whose charitable donations were larger than most companies' annual revenues. Alex's innovation, a breakthrough energy storage system that could make renewable energy viable at a global scale, lay half-presented on the sleek podium. 3 years of research, of sleeping on a cot in his workspace, of missing his sister's wedding because he couldn't afford the plane ticket, all reduced to an awkward moment of rejection for the amusement of the wealthy and powerful. His shoulders hunched involuntarily as he tried to make himself smaller, invisible, wishing the polished marble floor would open up and swallow him. "If you'll excuse the interruption," Harmon continued smoothly, consulting his Patek Philippe watch with practiced nonchalance. "We have several vetted presentations from Stanford's business incubator next. People with the right background," he emphasized, not even trying to hide the implication in his words. The room began to buzz again as attention shifted away from Alex's humiliation. Waiters circulated with fresh champagne, and investors turned back to their conversations about vacation homes and private school admissions. This minor entertainment was already being forgotten, just another moment, reinforcing the natural order of things. Alex fumbled with his prototype, a sleek cylinder that contained technology that could potentially revolutionize energy storage, making it infinitely more efficient than anything currently on the market. A security guard approached, clearly ready to escort him out, now that his moment of rejection was complete. Alex's vision blurred with unshed tears of frustration and anger. Not at Harmon, men like him were predictable, but at himself, for believing that merit alone could open doors in a world built on connections and pedigrees. "Excuse me." The voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable authority that caused heads to turn. The man in the black t-shirt and casual blazer had reached the front of the room. He stood out among the formal attire like a raven among peacocks, but there was something about his presence that commanded attention. I believe Mr. Chen was in the middle of explaining something potentially revolutionary. I'd like to hear the rest of it." The murmuring started immediately. Recognition rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Elon Musk, founder of Tesla, SpaceX, and half a dozen other companies that had changed the world, stood before them with his hands casually in his pockets, looking at Alex with genuine interest. Richard Harmon's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The smug superiority melted away, replaced by a careful neutrality that barely masked his sudden discomfort. "Elon," he said, forcing a smile, "I didn't realize you were attending today. Of course, if you're interested—" "I am." Musk cut him off without ceremony, his focus entirely on Alex and the prototype in his hands. "That design looks interesting. You're working with lithium polymer batteries in a new configuration?" Alex stood frozen for a moment, unable to process the sudden turn of events. The room had gone completely silent again, but this time all eyes were on Elon Musk and the young engineer who had been dismissed moments before. The energy in the room had transformed from dismissive amusement to intense curiosity. When the world's most famous tech innovator showed interest in something, everyone paid attention. Even the security guard had backed away, suddenly uncertain about his instructions. Yes, Alex finally managed, his voice steadying as he looked at his creation rather than the crowd. "But with a molecular restructuring of the cathode that increases capacity by 400% while reducing charging time by 60%. A palpable shift in the room's energy occurred as Elon Musk approached the podium. Investors who had been dismissively checking their phones or whispering to each other suddenly found themselves riveted to the scene unfolding before them. Richard Harmon stood to the side, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack walnuts, as Musk examined Alex's prototype with genuine curiosity. "Could you explain the molecular structure you're using?" Musk asked, turning the cylinder in his hands with the careful precision of someone who built rockets for a living. His eyes never left the device, respecting the work rather than the social hierarchy of the room. Alex swallowed hard, his hand steadying as he slipped into the familiar comfort of his technical expertise. This was his life's work. This he knew. "It's a carbon-silicon nanolattice with embedded lithium channels that allow for faster ion transfer without heat buildup," he explained, his voice growing stronger with each word. "The structure self-regulates under high-charge conditions to prevent thermal runaway." Around them, phones had emerged again, but this time they weren't recording a moment of humiliation. They were documenting something unexpected. Elon Musk engaged in deep technical conversation with an unknown engineer whose presentation had nearly been shut down. Several investors edged closer, straining to hear the exchange. Richard Harmon noticed this immediately, his expression darkening as he saw his authority in the room being undermined. "And the manufacturing cost?" Musk asked, his mind already calculating scalability as he examined the prototype's construction. "That's the breakthrough," Alex said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "The production process uses carbon capture from industrial emissions as a primary input. We're not just making batteries, we're sequestering carbon while we do it. Production costs are 42% lower than standard lithium-ion cells while delivering 4 times the capacity." Someone in the crowd whispered loudly enough to be heard, "Holy shit, that's actually brilliant." The tide was turning moment by moment as the technical merits of Alex's work came to light under the spotlight of Musk's attention. Richard Harmon wasn't a man accustomed to losing control of a situation, particularly not in his own carefully orchestrated investment summit. With practiced ease, he stepped forward, inserting himself between Musk and the growing crowd of suddenly interested investors. "While this is certainly an interesting science project," Harmon said with a tight smile, "we should respect everyone's time and move to our scheduled presentations. We have the Stanford Group waiting with their fully vetted business plans and market analysis. Musk looked up from the prototype, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. "I'm still evaluating this technology," he said simply, as if that settled the matter. And in many ways, it did. When the man who had revolutionized electric vehicles, space travel, and online payments decided something was worth his time, few would argue otherwise. A flash of irritation crossed Harmon's face, quickly masked behind a veneer of professional courtesy. "Of course, but perhaps Mr. Chen could schedule a proper meeting through appropriate channels. We have numerous qualified investors here today, expecting to see properly vetted opportunities." The implication was clear. Alex didn't belong in this room. He was an outsider, someone who had slipped through the cracks of an exclusive system. But as more investors gathered around, some taking pictures of the prototype, others whispering to their colleagues, the dynamic continued to shift. Wealth and influence were still the currencies of the room, but Musk's interest had suddenly made Alex rich in attention. "I didn't realize appropriate channels were the source of innovation," Musk replied, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the closest group of investors. "I thought it was people solving hard problems." He turned back to Alex, dismissing Harmon without another word. "Continue your presentation. I want to hear about energy density and cycle life." Harmon's face flushed crimson, but he stepped back, powerless against Musk's gravitational pull in the tech investment world. Alex looked from Musk to Harmon, then to the crowd of investors whose attention he now unexpectedly commanded. For a moment, the pressure threatened to overwhelm him, but then he caught sight of his prototype in Musk's hands. 3 years of work, countless failures, breakthroughs at 3 a.m. when everyone said it couldn't be done. This was his moment, delivered by the most unlikely of allies. Taking a deep breath, he stepped back to the podium and pulled up his presentation slides. "The energy density is 1,450 watt-hours per kilogram," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "That's nearly 4 times the current commercial standard, and we've tested it through 3,000 full charge cycles with less than 8% degradation." A low whistle came from someone in the audience, an investor who understood exactly what those numbers meant for everything from electric vehicles to grid storage. Smartphones that lasted a week between charges, electric cars with 1,000-mile ranges, solar energy stored efficiently enough to power homes through the night and cloudy days. "But the real breakthrough," Alex continued, clicking to a slide showing global carbon emissions, "is what this means for a climate impact. Each gigafactory producing these batteries would sequester carbon equivalent to planting 10 million trees annually, while simultaneously enabling wider adoption of renewable energy." Musk nodded thoughtfully, already running calculations in his head. "What's your manufacturing readiness level? Have you scaled beyond the prototype?" "We have a small production line in Oakland," Alex replied. "We're producing about 50 units daily for testing, but scaling requires capital we don't have yet." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Here was an innovation that checked every box that should matter: technical merit, market potential, global impact, and yet it had nearly been dismissed without a hearing because its creator lacked the right connections. Musk handed the prototype back to Alex, but his next words changed everything. "I'd like to visit your facility tomorrow, and I'm bringing some people from our battery team." The silence that followed was deafening. The room erupted into a flurry of movement and conversation. Investors who had ignored Alex minutes earlier now pressed business cards into his hands. Richard Harmon stood frozen, watching his carefully orchestrated event transform into something entirely beyond his control. The power dynamics had flipped so dramatically that several board members from his own venture fund were now clustered around the young engineer he had publicly humiliated. "Perhaps we should move this to a more appropriate setting," Harmon finally managed, attempting to regain some semblance of authority. We can schedule a proper due diligence session with... Due diligence is exactly what I'm doing now, Musk interrupted, his attention still focused on Alex's presentation data. That's the point of these gatherings, isn't it? To find innovation worth supporting? The question hung in the air, challenging not just Harman, but the entire system that had nearly silenced Alex's breakthrough. Alex clicked to the next slide, showing the environmental impact projections. The confidence in his voice was transformative, as if Musk's interest had awoken something dormant inside him. No longer the humiliated outsider, he stood tall as he explained the global implications of his technology. A woman in the front row, the CEO of a major renewable energy provider, raised her hand. These carbon sequestration numbers can't possibly be accurate. You're claiming to capture 12 tons of carbon per ton of battery material. The process uses industrial carbon emissions as a direct input for the cathode structure, Alex explained, grateful for the technical challenge rather than the social dismissal he'd faced earlier. We've verified the capture rate in our Oakland facility with third-party environmental auditors. The reports are in the appendix of my presentation. Musk nodded appreciatively. It's similar to what we considered during Tesla's early battery development, but we couldn't solve the degradation issues. You've apparently found a way around that problem. The significance of this statement wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Elon Musk, the world's foremost innovator in both electric vehicles and battery technology, was acknowledging that this unknown engineer had solved a problem his own teams couldn't crack. Richard Harman had not amassed billions by accepting defeat easily. With practiced smoothness, he stepped forward again, placing a hand on Alex's shoulder in a gesture that to outside observers might appear friendly, but which Alex felt as a subtle assertion of control. This is precisely why the Platinum Investment Summit exists, Harman declared, addressing the room while subtly repositioning himself as the facilitator of this connection rather than its obstacle. Bringing innovators and capital together, I'm thrilled that Elon has taken such interest in a technology that we were just beginning to evaluate. The audacity of this attempted narrative shift left Alex momentarily speechless. Harman was now trying to take credit for the very connection he had actively tried to prevent. But before he could respond, Musk spoke again. "Let's be clear about what happened here today," Musk said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the now silent room. He wasn't shouting, but something in his tone commanded complete attention. We nearly missed something important because of how we filter access to capital and opportunity. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Harman's hand dropped from Alex's shoulder. I've sat through hundreds of pitches from Stanford MBAs and Harvard Business School graduates with perfect slide decks and zero technical innovation, Musk continued, looking around the room with a directness that made several investors shift awkwardly in their seats. Meanwhile, real breakthroughs often happen in garages and small labs by people solving hard problems because they're obsessed with the solution, not the exit strategy. Alex felt a surge of validation washing over him, not just for his technology, but for the countless nights spent working while his peers attended networking events and investment parties he couldn't access. "The future isn't created in boardrooms," Musk said, the weight of his words settling over the crowd. "It's built by engineers and scientists and dreamers who refuse to accept that something is impossible." Investors throughout the room were now frantically taking notes or recording video. This wasn't just about a battery technology anymore. It was about a philosophy of innovation that challenged the very foundations of how investment decisions were made. Richard Harman's carefully composed facade had begun to crack. What should have been his moment of triumph, hosting the year's most exclusive investment event, had transformed into a public rebuke of everything his venture capital approach represented. "With all due respect, Elon," he said, straining to keep his voice level, There's a reason for proper channels and vetting processes. For every viable innovation, there are hundreds of technically interesting but commercially impractical ideas. Our job as investors is to filter. Your job, Musk interrupted, is to recognize potential that others miss. That's the only competitive advantage in venture capital. Otherwise, you're just a bank with worse terms. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the crowd. Several prominent investors were noticeably shifting their attention between Musk and Harmon, witnessing a clash of philosophies that went far beyond one startup or one technology. Alex, sensing a critical moment, stepped forward with renewed confidence. "I didn't come here looking for charity or special treatment," he said, meeting Harmon's gaze directly for the first time. "I came because this technology deserves to exist in the world, and because traditional funding channels are closed to people like me who don't have the right background or connections." The room had grown so quiet that the distant sounds of San Francisco traffic were audible through the glass walls. Every eye was fixed on the three men at the front: Harmon, representing the old guard of venture capital, Musk embodying the visionary innovator, and Alex standing for every outsider with a dream that the system had failed. Musk turned to face the room of investors, his expression serious. The most dangerous phrase in investing isn't "this might fail." It's "this doesn't fit our investment thesis." History doesn't care about your investment thesis. It remembers who saw the future clearly enough to help build it. He then turned back to Alex. "I've seen enough. I'm prepared to offer you initial funding to scale your production capabilities with an option for further investment as you hit technical milestones." He extended his hand. "We can work out details tomorrow at your facility." As Alex reached out to shake Musk's hand, hundreds of phones captured the moment that would soon spread across social media and business news worldwide. The moment when everything changed, not just for one engineer with a dream, but potentially for how innovation itself was funded. 3 weeks later, Alex stood in the center of his Oakland warehouse, now barely recognizable from the cluttered space where he had spent the last 3 years working in near isolation. Tesla engineers in company T-shirts moved purposefully around the expanded production line, scaling his prototype into something that could meet industrial demands. The transformation wasn't just physical. Alex himself had changed, standing straighter, speaking with the confidence of someone whose vision had been validated at the highest level. The video of Elon Musk offering him funding had gone viral almost immediately after the Platinum Investment Summit. Within hours, it had spread across Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, accumulating millions of views and sparking intense discussions about access to capital in the tech industry. Innovation, outsider, and Musk moment had trended for days. Major business publications had picked up the story, contrasting Alex's background with the typical Silicon Valley founder profile. Richard Harmon had released a carefully worded statement praising the discovery of new talent at his event, attempting to position himself as the facilitator rather than the obstacle. Few were convinced, especially after multiple attendees had shared their versions of what really happened. The most damaging quotes came from Musk himself, who had tweeted simply, "True innovation rarely comes through proper channels. We need to fix this system." The impact extended far beyond Alex's personal journey. Venture capital firms across Silicon Valley were suddenly announcing new outsider innovation initiatives and reviewing their filtering processes. Several prominent firms published data on the demographic makeup of their portfolio founders, data that confirmed what many had long suspected about systemic barriers to funding. A national conversation had begun about who gets access to investment capital and why. For Alex, the validation came not just in funding, but in seeing his technology taken seriously. The prototype that had once sat ignored on his workbench was now being tested in Tesla's advanced battery labs. Initial results had confirmed everything he had claimed about energy density and charging cycles. Production scaling challenges remained, but with Musk's resources behind him, these were problems to solve rather than insurmountable barriers. We're looking at initial implementation in grid storage applications by Q3, Alex explained to a group of engineers during their daily briefing. The stationary use case gives us time to perfect the technology before moving to vehicle applications. Across the warehouse, the door opened and Elon Musk walked in, characteristically without fanfare or announcement. He nodded approvingly at the progress visible throughout the facility before making his way directly to where Alex was standing. The environmental impact report came back even better than expected, Musk said without preamble, handing Alex a tablet displaying detailed carbon sequestration data. Your process is capturing 18% more carbon than your models predicted. The climate implications alone would justify scaling this technology. Alex took the tablet, a smile spreading across his face as he reviewed the data. We've modified the intake system to improve capture efficiency, he explained. It was one of the optimizations we couldn't implement before due to cost constraints. Musk nodded, understanding the subtext, what becomes possible when innovation is properly resourced. I'm announcing a full partnership at next week's shareholder meeting, he said. We're creating a new division around this technology with you as Chief Technical Officer. Around them, engineers and production staff had paused their work, aware they were witnessing another pivotal moment. Alex thought about the journey, from working alone in this same warehouse, maxing out credit cards to buy equipment, to now standing as an equal beside the world's most renowned innovator. The most valuable natural resource isn't oil or lithium or even talent, Musk said, loud enough for everyone to hear. It's perspective, the ability to see solutions where others don't. We nearly lost this breakthrough because our system values pedigree over innovation. He extended his hand to Alex. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again. As they shook hands for the second time, Alex realized the true impact of what had happened. This wasn't just about one technology or one career saved from obscurity. It was about transforming how innovation itself was discovered, valued, and brought into the world, a ripple effect that would open doors for countless others whose ideas might have otherwise gone unheard. The future, it turned out, truly did belong to those with ideas, not just those with connections.